Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 where I'm going to set up our application. There's one change that I had to make. I had to install Body Parser and add it to my dependency list. I'm going to use Body Parser to accept data from my API routes. With Body Parser required from application, now I'm going to set up the rest of it. For our static directory, we're going to leave it at public for now. All of our HTML is going to be in there, but I'm going to change this to app/public because that's where I put my code. Now that we have this set up, I think we can move on to setting up our route. So let's set up our API route. So inside here, I'm going to set up an API route. Just call it API routes.js. Inside this file, since I'm going to be requiring it in my server.js, I'm going to at first set up the module export. Now that I have this set up, I'm going to define some of the routes. Now, we said we're going to do a CrudsList application. We haven't set up our model yet, but we can talk about the basic routes and we'll come back and update these later. But let's set up our framework so we can leave a roadmap for ourselves to continue creating our application. Okay, our basic routes are set up, but yet we can still be more specific and start to put details in later. First, let's set up a basic model so we can have an idea as to what each of these routes will do. Mind you, we set up our CRUD application, so CRUD, create, read, update, delete. We're going to use get for read, put for update, post for create, and delete for delete. Inside of my models folder, we'll call this an item. It's a little generic, but this item will represent our item that we want to sell. This is something that we're going to require later, so let's set up the module.exports. What's interesting here is what we'll pass into the exports. One thing is going to be Sequelize, and the other thing will be data types. Now, this is something that I know from working with Sequelize. This item will make a variable called var item, and we'll do Sequelize.define. We'll call this capital I item, or you can do lowercase. I don't have a preference. We'll pass in our schema information. An item is going to have a name. It'll also have a price, and we'll have a category. As we start out, let's just say that this is data types dot string. Data types dot decimal, because we have two decimal places we're going to use. And category is also going to be data type dot string. Also, I want to return this to do when this function is called by Sequelize. Now we have an item that we can use in our application. It'll be created as a database table, and we'll be able to write data to the database table using this item. Now back in our routes, we're going to have to do another require, and we're going to have to pass in our model so we can do some stuff. But before we get to that step, we're going to save our routes, and we're going to continue setting up our Express application. We're going to say app.listen, and we're going to give it port 3000, and we'll give it a handler function. We'll actually take our port and make it a variable in case we want to deploy this to Heroku, and in that case we do process.env.port port. We'll change this to port. We'll change this to port as well. A little templating magic. Let's see if our application works before we get started. Alright, we're listening on port 3000. None of our routes work yet, but at least we know that we don't have any code that's broken in our configuration. We need to import a reference to our database, and we'll call that require, and we'll go into our directory where our models live. w/models. Let's also bring in our routes. Now that we have our API routes a part of our application, let's now associate that data with our application, our API routes with that application. So far, so good. I'm going to run my application once more. Alright, looks like I misspelled some stuff in my model, so let's look at my model. I misspelled data type to data types for the category. So I changed it to data types, and I believe our application should be up and running once again. Okay, we're back listening on port 3000. Doing good so far. Before we move on, we need to take our DB Sequelize.sync. And we got to sync our information to our database. And since this returns a promise, we'll also work with our promise here. Once the sync has been completed, that's the only time that we want to connect to our server. We want to make our server listen. You don't want to make the server listen before you do that part, because if something happens with your database, your application isn't reliable at that point. Let's test it again. This is the part of the application that we haven't covered. Let's make sure that our database is configured and set up properly. We're going to MySQL Workbench, and I have 2 lines of code here, SQL code that is, already ready to go. CrudsList _DB, drop it if it exists, and then we're going to recreate it. You don't need to run this every time, but until you get things set up the right way, this is what you want to do. So now I'm going to refresh on this side, and I see my CrudsList DB. We have to go back into our application and check out our config.json. This is not correct anymore. So our database here in our development environment is now CrudsList _DB. With these changes saved, let's run our application. As you can see, there is the creation of our table items, because Sequelize pluralizes the table name of the model name that we gave it. And we have our data defined as we anticipated, our primary key set up. And there's also created at and updated at columns that we can use later for diagnostic purposes or for just reconciling our data. We go back to our database and we look inside, we check our table view, we have our items. We're on the right track. Now we want to go inside our API routes. We want to also include our models. We have 2 options. We can pass in the models here, or we can require it. So in that case, since I already required it once here, I'm going to pass in that database reference right to my routes, directly to my routes from this function and call right here on API routes. Going to my API routes, I'm going to pass in my DB here. And first, I want to set up this route to get all of our data. All of the items we have in our database, we're going to set that route up. Once a user comes to this endpoint via the API, we do db.items.findAll. We pass in any where conditions, which we don't have any filters right now. .then function. We say our result from the database. And I'm just going to update my route here and make sure I pass in the request and the response. I'm going to say response.json and pass in result. Now we're going to rerun our application. Everything so far so good. Now let's use a tool I like to use called Postman to test my database and make sure everything's working as I anticipated. With Postman set up and ready to go, I'll change my method to get and I'll enter my URL. We do localhost 3000 API/all. And let's see what we get back in return. Okay, looks like I didn't set everything up properly. Let's go back and have a look. Okay, turns out that I was not consistent with the way I defined my model. I defined my model name as item. Then in my route, I put items plural. I'll have to be more careful in the future for that. Item must match whatever I defined my model name, because it's coming from Sequelize, so that's what we defined. So when I go back and I run my code through the endpoint, I get an empty array. That's no fun. Let's actually make a new item. So we're going to pass in the request and the response. So here's what I want to see happen. I want to see that when I create an item, I want to get that result right back to the user. From here, though, I need to start to set some data. What's the name of the item that I'm creating? Okay, what's the category? And what's the price? Here's where things come in with body parser. I can do request.body.name, request.body.category, and finally, request.body.price. I'm going to restart my server first. Now, let's go to Postman and make this change. My API route is going to be not API, but new, because I'm going to create a new one. I need to change my method to post, and I want to set up my body. I like the raw, and I like to use JSON, so I can type it the same way I type my other JSON thing, my other JSON data. I'll say the name. We're going to sell a lawnmower. Price. Say we only want $100 for it, $100.50. And then the category, we'll call this one lawn care. So any items with lawn care is a category we can maybe later on do some stuff with. So at our new route with the right method and some data, let's see what happens. And the outcome is as expected. We took that data straight to our route, and now we have the name, company, price, and 3 other fields that we did not send. We have the ID, which is created by Sequelize as our primary key, the updated at and created at timestamps. Now this data again lets us have access to when something was created the last time we made a change to it. And that can be very valuable if you want to get the last update from a user. You can start to sort data by the updated at time. This is all in good, but we still have 2 endpoints we haven't touched. So let's go to these endpoints. In this case, we want to say db item dot update dot then function result, and this is our database result we're expecting back, and we want to pass in some data here. So what fields do we want to change? And more specifically, we're gonna have to decide where we want to change this. So let's set that part up, because if we don't set a where, it's gonna update all of our items. Now that we've made this lawn care item a leaf blower, we'll make one more. We only want $5.50 for this. It's still in the lawn care. We send this over to the server. There we are. Now if we run our all route, go to get. So we see leaf blower, rusty old shovel, and our lawnmower, all in our lawn care category. These are all the things we want to sell on our CrudsList. Now going back to what we want to update, we're going to get the where, which is determining which item we want to make a change to. And this is going to come from the request, the response, the request.params.id. I got that from this special character. The colon right before my ID lets me know that my ID is going to be passed in by the user. So that's the ID that I want. Now, what update do I want? So I want to change the name, for instance. In this case, we just change the name, request.body.name. So if someone sends any other data, we're not going to use it. We're just going to update the name for now. Let's restart our server and run this example. So we're going to do an update, put for update, and then we say API/update. Now, what's the ID of the item we want to update? Well, we got 3. We're going to change the rusty old shovel, so we'll put 3. We'll change the rusty old shovel to a different value. Let's go to the body. Let's also select it to raw and set it to JSON. Here, I'm going to change the name. Got to use quotes in this tool. Change the name to super rusty old shovel. Now let's see what we get back. I didn't return any results, so therefore the application is holding on, but I think the data got stored. If I run API of all, I get super rusty old shovel. But let's fix that hanging problem. Let's do a response.json and we send our results. With these set up, we're almost done with the API side of our application. We'll do a request, response, or to delete, we're going to say destroy. So api.item.destroy. And the really important thing here is our where clause. We got to decide what our where clause is. Of course, we're going to restart the server. Now we're going to add another route. We're going to change this route. We're going to do delete /1 because we don't want the lawnmower. It was accidentally put in our application. We'll hit send. Things go well. Can I get... We did not change our method. We'll change our method. We'll hit send. Gave me back the ID of the element that was deleted. And then if we look down here, delete from items where ID equals 1. So we're right on the money. Now we have our API for our CrudsList application. We can take this code and turn it into a full-blown UI application by just adding some files into our HTML public side and adding some functionality. Thanks for watching. We'll see you the next time.